Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about some of my views about where the Western civilization might be going. And I have recently returned from a 1-month long visit to Italy. And over the last few years, I have visited for a long period of time. I stayed for a long period of time in Greece, in Spain, and in Turkey. And my interest was to not only to understand, to get a feel for the future of the countries around the Mediterranean Sea, but my interest was to get a feel for the future of the Western civilization. And in a very convoluted way, I also think that people should visit those countries to understand the future of the developing world. When I travel, my key interest is to understand the culture of the country I'm visiting. I prefer to live like a local. I hang around at coffee shops. I go to places where local people go. I spend a lot of time in the poor parts of their cities, and I go to cities that no tourist goes to. In my view, it's very easy to get lost in economic numbers. So you can pick and choose about what conclusion you want to reach, and then you can pick and choose an economic number. So people will pick up numbers on GDP growth rate, interest rate, currency rate, demographics, public and private debt. You can pretty much pick up any number to prove a conclusion that you have pre-decided on. In my view, these are isolated details. They cannot by themselves help you understand the course that a country is on. To understand the course, one must try to understand the culture of the country. Culture is the roots. You understand the culture and you will solve the puzzle of the branches. You understand the culture and it gives you a context to understand the details, the economic numbers that I was talking about. And I think a lot of economists should abstain from staying in 5-star hotels and driving around in air-conditioned Mercedes. They can't really understand the local culture by living Western ways in the poor countries. And once you understand the culture, you will no longer get confused about, and you won't get into circular discussions on whether Somalia is a libertarian country or not, and whether Sweden is a socialist country or not. But today I want to talk about Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, collectively known as PIGS. And as I go through my talk, you will realize I quite like this acronym, PIGS. Now, in the larger scheme of things, PIGS, and particularly Greece and Cyprus, are insignificant. They don't really make any difference to the world. They are just noise in a way. But they give you a glimpse of the future of the Western civilization. As I said, I have been to these countries. I have spent a fair bit of time in these countries over the last few years. But because Italy is fresh in my mind, I'm going to focus mostly on Italy today. What I'm going to talk about, I think, holds true culturally for the rest of PIGS. From Rome, an empire once ruled a very significant part of the world. During its heydays, building on the contribution made by Greece, they provided a way of perceiving the world that distinguished human beings from animals. They did something that raised human beings from barbaric life to civilization. What was that? Greece and Rome showed to humanity a way to reason and to understand the concept of causality. Now, those people who understand these concepts, who grew up in these concepts, take them as given, as natural. That's not true for a large part of human population. Greece and Rome started an approach that could release humanity from quivering under the unknown, mysterious, the unpredictable forces of nature, and from the fear of the priests. In the late Middle Ages, Italy contributed enormously to the Renaissance, which basically set in motion an unprecedented material progress for human civilization. Geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo lived in what is called Italy today. Now, there is a common narrative, an acceptable narrative about pigs that I hear quite often, and the narrative is that pigs are freewheeling societies. The narrative is that these countries give a lot of personal freedom to their people. They might not be rolling in money, but according to the narrative, these people actually enjoy their lives. And this is, of course, this narrative comes up when they try to compare pigs with North Americans. Now, Italian fashions attract people from all over the world, from Japan, from Korea, from China. When you walk around the cities, early in the evenings, public squares called piazzas start getting crowded with young people, very early in the evenings. And of course, you can drink openly in Italy. And I'm all in support of that. These young people, when they start arriving at the public squares, they would have had their long siestas. And when I went out for my morning jog, they were still partying in the public squares. Now, these people, pigs, are known for their deep social cohesions and their close-knit families. The families are supposed to be very close-knit families. And I also come from a country where the conventional narrative is that they have very close-knit families. But I'm going to not talk about that right now. It is believed that these people are very warm-hearted people, they care for each other. And then scratch the surface, and the reality is very different. Now, Greece recently voted to say no to reduction in free stuff that they have been getting from rest of European Union. Now, decades of easy life and freebies have hardwired many people in pigs to expect free stuff as their fundamental natural right. Now, as I said, I try to talk with a lot of people when I travel, and I'm struggling to recall a well-dressed, educated person who told me in pigs that they agreed with reduction in freebies. They have been hardwired to continue to get free stuff. Now, pigs are third world countries in many ways. And they would be third world countries were they not proximal to what is called Northern Europe. Graffiti is everywhere in pigs. Public spaces are dirty. At the train stations and at banks, the lineups are long, unhelpful, and often rude. And really, if you end up annoying an Italian auntie who somehow assumes a superior position, every issue will be blown out of proportion. Even non-issues will crop up and then they will blow up. And a situation that gets created because of emotions cannot be undone through reason. You have to de-escalate using emotions. So let me talk about a few encounters I had in Italy. I arrived very late in the night at Milan airport. And I exited the customs area, and the information desks were completely empty. There was no security official either. There was absolutely none at all to give you any kind of help whatsoever. There was no ATM at the airport. They were all locked away for the night. And the one question that came to me when I was traveling in Greece and Spain and Italy immediately came to my mind. In Italy, unemployment rate among the youth is 41%. 41%. The question that I always got in my mind was, with so much unemployment, why were these information desks not manned? Why were there no people to help you around? I would have done that kind of job for $5 an hour or much less. Now, 2 millennia, and this is amazing architecture. 2 millennia after the construction of the Colosseum, today it still gets more people per day than it ever got when it was actually operational. They are making much, much more money today than they ever made. Italian cities are packed with tourists. North Europeans go to their beaches, the cities, the museums, the resorts. Capital that was invested between 500 to 2,000 years back in Italy is still one of the biggest revenue generator in Italy. And that is the good thing about capital. It can keep you running even when you have lost the engine power for a very long time. But when I visited Roman Forum, the Colosseum, the museums, I experienced something very similar that I experienced at the Milan airport. I would have normally expected guards, guides, people to make sure that the tourists did not disturb those expensive art and statues at the museums, or did not really mess around with rocks at the Colosseum, etc., etc. But I hardly ever found people around in these places. What was happening? They were standing outside these buildings, chatting away and smoking. Now, people in PIGS have a very strong sense of victim mentality. Victim mentality by itself is enough to undo any civilization. And on Bloomberg, you might hear or watch Greeks and Italians and Spanish complaining that Germans have stopped sending free stuff to them. But when I talked with these people, I almost never heard the name Germany. What they hate is not Germany, but each other. You talk with Armenians and they will bitch about Turkish. You talk with Turkish and Turkish will bitch about Greece. And Greece have a lot of bad things to say about Italians, and Italians have bad things to say about Spain, and vice versa. And there's a strange kind of small-minded nationalism that I have seen in these countries. If you are in Italy, and if you see a statue, and if to an Italian you might allude to your thought that a statue might be Greek, you have some very red faces. Very simple things like where this anise drink was invented, or whether that sweet stuff that you ate in Greece was Turkish delight or something Greek, can lead to very small-minded, nationalistic argumentation. I certainly shudder at what I have seen in those countries. Now, pickpocketing is extremely common in pigs. They are the best pickpocketers in the world. Almost a month back, my passport, my credit cards, and my cash, my cameras, and several other things were pickpocketed when I was looking at platform allocation of my train at Naples train station, sorry. There was one good thing that happened. There were CCTV cameras all above me while this happened to me. So very confidently, I ran to the police station. Within 5 minutes, I was talking with a police officer, explaining to him what had happened. But before I could do that, he laughed. And then he asked me to fill up a form and waved me off. I insisted that he at least came out. It was only half a minute away where I was pickpocketed. If he could identify the location so that he could cross-check with the CCTV recording. They had absolutely no interest in doing so. Now, in my subsequent this story actually continues. So I was without my passport, without money, without credit cards, and I had to get to my next destination. So I went to the ticket counter and said, listen, this is the police report, and I have a ticket, but my train is gone because I was at the police station. Can you let me on the next train, which was leaving in 15 or 20 minutes? He was rude, unhelpful, and not interested. I talked with the manager, and the response was similar. Now, in subsequent conversation, while I was still traveling in Italy for the next 2 weeks, I mentioned this pickpocketing case to several people. And almost instinctively, they assumed that the people who pickpocketed me were gypsies. Now, if you're an African or a gypsy or a black, bad luck. It's not easy for you to find a job in pigs. Now, I don't have much sympathy for these three communities, because in general, they came from much worse off countries, and they should have exploited the opportunities better where they came to. But at the same time, it's difficult to understand how systemic this belief goes in pigs against gypsies, Muslims, and blacks. Now, in my case, after I had connected the dots, I realized that I was pickpocketed by white Italian men. When I told this to the police, they were not interested in listening to me. When I told this to the other people I talked with later, they lost interest. So, compared to people in North America, in my view, people of pigs are not really freewheeling people. They tend to be very apathetic towards their work, much more keen on partying. They are very consumerist, and they are more prone to spend what they have, and hence more prone to be indebted. They are very tribal, and don't really care about other people outside their tribe. But this was the question that lingered in my mind for a while. Do they care about people within the tribe? And I'm not sure. I don't have enough anecdotal experiences here to talk about. So I don't know how close-knit the families are, but I do know some people, some of my acquaintances in Italy, and these are very homely people. Children still stay with their parents until they are in their 30s and 40s. But it seems to me that's more because the mom does the laundry and cooks the food. But that's just a thought. I'm not sure what's actually happening. What is something I know is that how they do their jobs and how they look after their public spaces does not tell me much about their love for each other. Rampant smoking, utter dislike for work, does it really tell you about happy lives of those people? Not to me. It must be truly hard to spend your day doing what you hate to do. Now, in my view, and I have nothing against partying, but in my view, a pleasure-centered life centered on pleasure, and never-ending partying are nothing but an escape from the drudgery of normal existence. So, I know there has been a lot of conversations on TV and in the public media about deaths of pigs. And the belief is that deaths is what their problem is. And I think these people merely look at the surface. As I said initially, they merely look at some of the isolated economic numbers. And the situation of pigs is no different from what happens to a poor person anywhere in the world who wins a multi-million-dollar lottery. Those poor people often, within months, go as broke as they were before they won their lotteries. And I think the situation of pigs is very similar. If through a magic wand I could neutralize their debts, they would be worse off in almost no time. The problem of the pigs is the problem of their culture. They have lost reason. And this is very ironical because this area was the birthplace of reason. Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo would be completely feel out of place in Italy. In my view, and this is where I come to my conclusion on when I say I see a glimpse of the future of the Western civilization here, I think the culture of economic and emotional dependence, beggar mentality, the concept of positive rights clogs the arteries of the civilization, of the society. And these clogs continue to accumulate more and more of the same. As a society becomes more irrational, the less capable it becomes to find its way back to rationality. So those people who think that truth and reason should always win are completely wrong. I think to avoid the future, same as that of pigs, Northern Europe and North America should try to understand the culture of pigs. I think, and I don't want to expand on this much, but even the developing world should pay attention to pigs, because if you get too much money too quickly, things go wrong for you. But these are all rhetorical suggestions, because once a trend has been set in motion, you cannot change it or reverse its direction. Thank you very much for your time. have a couple of minutes if you have any questions. Yes?
Well, I come from a country that was colonized by mostly two countries from the PIGS.
Yeah.
So I come from Brazil, and two of the countries that you mentioned, Portugal and Italy, actually are the ones that colonized my country. So you can imagine all the problems you mentioned apply to Brazil. But what I'm seeing right now is a great change in the mindset, not of everybody, not of the average Brazilian, but of the elite. A lot of people are turning to libertarianism. A lot of people are following Mises Institute, are reading Atlas Shrugged. So I was wondering if you think that there can be a change through education, not a standard education, but through readings and that sort of thing.
I think as long as any country has democracy, it can only get worse and worse by the time. There's nothing you can do about it. So you might be able to take a step forward once after taking 2 steps backwards, and that's what I would imagine what you just said might be. But as long as a country is democratic, I don't see a chance for a country to change its course. And the reason is that there is almost certainly more than 50% of any population that does not like to think, and they like free stuff, and they will vote to get the free stuff, and they are the biggest voting bloc in any society. Yes, sir. Great.
You might have some credibility speaking on India. Perhaps you could talk in the context of Indian. Sorry, you have some credibility probably speaking on India. Perhaps you could speak on Indian culture and the probability that, as the press has suggested, that Modi or somebody else might make some difference.
Well, again, the best politicians can do is not to make things worse. So expecting Modi to change the course of that country in a positive direction is not going to happen. But I'm actually much more pessimistic about India from that perspective. Modi is a simpleton. He's a Hindu fanatic. He lacks an understanding of complexity. So his instincts want to take simplistic decisions. Hindu fanaticism has consistently grown in that country over the last few years. And I think as far as being able to change the institutional structure of the country, it's absolutely impossible because the bureaucrats run that country, not politicians. But that is probably true with every country. We give too much blame to politicians. The real blame goes to the bureaucrats. But then actually I must go down from the trunks to the roots. And that is the culture. So if you talk with a normal Indian, every Indian will tell you that he wants end to corruption. And then you watch his behavior. He will take and accept bribes. As long as it's an extremely dishonest society, as long as those people within themselves are so corrupt, it's impossible for that culture to create or continue to have people in institutions that can be honest. Just one quick one. Sorry, Doug, yes.
You're living in Singapore. What do you think about China these days? How would you compare that?
So when I was talking, I expressed my disillusionment with a lot of developing world, and I think Africa and India and a lot of other countries have become rich, but I don't think culturally they have improved. I think China is different. I'm much more optimistic about China. In a way, it has been through a reset in the last 50 years or so. Well, whatever happened during the revolution, I'm not saying it should have happened, but in a way, the secondary consequence, in my view, has been that a culture has been through a sort of reset. I have found it very easy to communicate with Chinese and reason with them, and you can discuss with them about Taiwan and Tibet, not with everyone, of course, but with a much larger proportion of Chinese than with, let's say, Indians or Africans. So I'm much more optimistic about China. I have seen bookstores, and I go to China quite often. I have seen bookstores in big cities in China that are 3, 4, or 5 floor big. And this is a country where people say that copyright violation is very common. The reality is that a lot of these books are translated into Mandarin. So even if they're copied, there is enough demand for original copies in China of books written by Warren Buffett, Stephen Covey, Dale Carnegie. So in my view, there is a cultural renaissance happening in China. Sorry, I think we have run out of time, so I'll be very happy to talk with others later. Thank you very much. And we'll have Albert and Walter Brock.